Welcome back to Theology in Action. I'm Levi Hightree with Tony Caffey, fresh off of a little bit of a trip to Florida. How you feeling?
Feel great. Great to be back here with you. Important topic today.
Yeah.
It's an understatement to call it controversial,
Yeah.
what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we are talking about marijuana today, and it is an interesting and controversial topic because we've talked about it a little bit before, and I've read your notes because you're doing a talk on it.
Yeah, so I'm doing a seminar tomorrow as part of our Walk the Talk seminar series here, and it'll be the first time that we're actually doing this with a live feed, online. So, I mean, that's different for us because typically with what we do with Walk the Talk as part of care ministry, we've done that in such a way where it's in a environment where it's not being broadcasted and people can ask questions and interact without, the prospect of putting it online forever. But this one, we feel because of the importance of the topic, we're going to go ahead and, put it even on our website long-term, address the issue, just get all out in the open, even take some questions.
Yeah.
But you and I, since you are privy to all the information that I've put together for it, we're going to kind of talk about it already and anticipate some of the questions that'll come tomorrow.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I like I said, I read through your manuscript and I've heard you talk about it before, and I've noticed, I'm like, well, this might be one of Tony's like soapbox areas, and that kind of surprised me.
One of many, Levi.
For me, it was one of those. I'm like, I'll talk about it, and like I have my stances one way or another, which we'll dig into, but it wasn't I'm going to put my foot in the ground. I'm going to push back hard on this one.
Yeah.
You make some points. I'm like, well, maybe I should be taking a bigger stand. So let's just kind of start there. Is this one of your soapbox issues? And can you elaborate on that a little?
Well, soapbox, that's kind of intrinsically a negative statement. I can't get super exercised about, genetically modified fruits and vegetables. Some people get really amped up about that. I remember there was a time in my church where minimalism became all the rage and everybody was downsizing, and I just can't get amped up about that or find a lot of, struggles in the Bible. And even things like Harry Potter, there was that whole Harry Potter craze and it went back and forth in churches. I just can't get amped up about those issues. This issue, though, is important enough for me to take a hard look at the subject and then also what the Bible has to say about it. So, yes, it is one of those issues. And I think, too, that, the wool is over the eyes of a lot of Americans that aren't taking serious the health threats that marijuana is and how, even in some other countries, England in particular, we're seeing marijuana usage go down. We're seeing some real linkage between marijuana and mental health issues. Yeah. And so the public is informed and have started to distance themselves more from marijuana. It'll always be a part of the subculture there and everywhere. But here in America, it's soaring, and now we have big cannabis and money flowing in to make the problem worse and worse and worse, and the age of use is getting younger and younger and younger. That's not good. So it's enough of an issue for me to say we need to talk about this.
Yeah, and so growing up, I grew up close to and around and adjacent with a lot of people that were involved in smoking marijuana, and the conversation was always like they were very laid back about it. It didn't make them violent. It made them just want to relax and think and sit at home, and it wasn't addictive. And in your notes, you point out a few different places that may be a little bit of a misnomer. There's that the data is actually showing that's not the case, and that people are just kind of saying that because that's what they've heard or that's what they feel.
Yeah, have you ever heard the statement? It's easy to quit smoking tobacco. I've done it thousands of times.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's kind of the same mindset with marijuana. And yes, in terms of, I guess, the psychosomatic effects, it's not the same as nicotine, but it is addictive psychologically. It is habit forming.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of myths. It's funny because, the myth busting when I was young and then on into the 90s and the 2000s, marijuana as a gateway drug is a myth. Well, it turns out that actually is the myth, calling it a myth. And there's other kinds of things that have circulated as well, where it's almost like an overreaction to, the drug war issues that we dealt with in the 90s, the Just Say No and the ways in which we went about it. It seemed like the more we were trying to fight the drug war when I was a kid, the problem just got worse and worse and worse, and there was a ton of money being thrown at it. So, and I think, too, people conflate the issues of decriminalization and legalization.
Yeah.
So that's a big issue because, we do have issues. We have these drug busts and these arrests for usage or for possession and long prison sentences in some cases, and unfairly dished out, where in some cases it's years and years and years, and in other cases people get off without anything, and that didn't really make sense. And so people have said, yes, we need to decriminalize it, which, okay, I understand. In fact, that's pretty much happening right now as we speak, even without any legal action. But to say, but that's not the same as legalization, and that's not the same as incentivizing its usage. And so you have, these stores on every street corner now, in some cases preying upon certain segments of our society and the poor and creating more social problems. I just don't think we're understanding enough to see the long-term effects of it. And maybe you have the isolated people, you have the Joe Rogans of this world, I smoke weed and nothing bad happens. Okay, well, think beyond yourself to the greater framework of what's happening in our country. All of us have to do that. And even Rogan has come to terms with the fact that, okay, you can do what you want as, I don't know how old he is, a 50-plus-year-old adult, but, I mean, this is affecting children, and he's got children, and we need to think about the way in which our own behavior is affecting young people and hurting young people. And, I grew up too, maybe this is why I'm passionate as well. I grew up in the world where big tobacco was, anathema in American society. How dare they pull the wool over our eyes, and we went after them. And one of my favorite movies is The Insider with Russell Crowe, where he's like the whistleblower. And I mean, that was an interesting movie, and it kind of awakened, I guess, our whole country to the danger of what happens, with lung cancer and the connection with other types of health issue with smoking.
Yeah, I remember a lot of the both sides of that. There was glorification of smoking for a long time, then a lot of pushback on why are we fighting against this? Now you don't see smoking in restaurants really anywhere anymore.
Yeah, so that's confusing to me because big cannabis is basically using the same playbook as big tobacco in terms of the way that they're promoting their product and the way in which it's even marketing to young people. I remember Joe Camel and all the pushback that they received from that when I was young. And it's like, those same kinds of methods are being used by the marijuana lobbies in today's world. And why are we not fired up about that like we are about big tobacco? And when the real damage and the effects of both, I mean, both of them aren't great, but I would say that the danger to your children is exponentially with marijuana usage compared to what it is with tobacco usage. So for that reason and more, now I'm getting fired up here.
I knew
Levi, just thinking about these things and okay, there's going to be, our government's going to do what our government's going to do. We're trying to influence. We're trying to change minds. I'm really going after the hearts and minds of parents, especially the children in our community, and say, take a stand before you just kind of throw up your hands and say, do what you're going to do. There's no stopping it, or it's safe, or just buying into some of these myths. At least do some research and decide for yourself for the sake of your children.
Yeah. So there's a few points I want to pull from that. I want to start with really looking through your manuscript. Like, again, I said, I wasn't didn't have a real hard stand on this, but one of the points that you really I started thinking about, that should maybe be something we think about and talk about more. You talked about how the marijuana, what we smoke and what is available nowadays, and with technology where we're at nowadays, is significantly different than what people used in the 60s and 70s when it grew its popularity. Can you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, so marijuana, the plant isn't native to North America.
Yeah.
It's from India, and yet it was brought over into Mexico by colonizers and explorers, and so it started to be grown in marijuana. And when it started to get popular, it really skyrocketed in popularity in the 60s and the 70s, the whole countercultural vibe of that world before I was born. And, its usage was in terms of THC content, which is the real essence of the drug that makes you high.
Intoxication. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's what they're after.
Yeah.
Was a marginal percentage of, whatever was smoked.
Sure.
And so,
I think you said
in one of the
1% somewhere around there in a study.
Yeah. So all the data that I'm drawing from is from a book called Tell Your Children by Alex Berenson. Great book, super detailed. So if you're going to read it, just be aware that there's a lot of data in there that you have to wade through. But he talks about that, it basically that's the equivalent of near beer in the alcohol industry.
Yeah.
So you're basically moving from near beer to something like Everclear or some, high, alcohol content product, because the THC content has been, 25, 30 times intensified within, marijuana products. And it's basically unregulated because the incentives for big cannabis really is you want addicts. You don't want, it's the same with tobacco. You don't want one-time users or occasional users. There's no money there. No. The money is in people who get hooked and get hooked early in life. Microsoft and Apple did the same things. They brought computers into schools when kids were little, and then they got hooked on computers, and now we all have to live with our computers. Okay, so that's a safe product.
Yeah.
Sort of. I guess that's another podcast, but yeah, I mean, the same kind of reasoning is happening with big cannabis. Let's get the youngest people hooked early to use the most of the product so that we can maximize its potential, maximize the revenues that we have. And part of that involves an intensification of THC in an unregulated market. And then here's where it gets really nefarious what's taking place, because not only do we have smoking, smoked marijuana, which I guess is the most popular still. I actually don't know. But now you have edibles.
Yeah.
Now you have products that are marketed for younger people that maybe sidestep some of the issues of carcinogens and other things that are associated with smoking. And sometimes, I mean, you can read in another book called Smoke Screen that some of the new marketing involves like these Skittles and other candies and drinks that basically have removed marijuana from the equation altogether. And instead, they're just extracting THC and putting them right into these edible forms. Yeah. I mean, who eats Skittles? I mean, this is marketing basically for young people.
I'll make an interesting parallel, and I promise they'll connect in the end. As a nutrition specialist, you talked about like the marketing campaigns, and you want people addicted or to think, yes, I want to come back to this. Repeat offenders may not be the best term, but are what you want, because that's where the money is. You see that in food industries, and as well, every few years you hear some random new food get labeled as a superfood. Avocados, great for you. Superfood doesn't really exist. It's just this is a healthy food that has some benefit. I've seen kind of the same thing happen with marijuana. They say it's a cure-all. It does this. If you have, we've joked about if you've got arthritis, if you can't sleep, if you've got bad back, if you've got
irritable bowel syndrome,
exactly anything.
Marijuana cures everything.
I find it hard to believe it can cure all of it. I think somewhere in your notes you had talked about like a lot of that is a myth as well, right?
Yeah. The curative properties of it are, and there's better things out there for the kinds of diseases, but it's never been through a real stringent FDA process in order to approve it as a drug or to approve it for certain usages. It's just kind of this myth that circulates. And the comparison I use is from my big fat Greek wedding, the Greek dad who uses Windex on everything. You got this, you spray some Windex on it. You got this, that's the mentality that people use with marijuana. Not just marijuana, but also CBD, which is for the most part a safe extract from marijuana. It has no hallucinogenic properties or anything like that. But people promote that like it's the cure-all for everything, and a lot of it is just like the same playbook as the essential oils crowd that uses crazy reasoning for
Yeah.
their placebo effects for the things that they use. So let me go back to something you said, because I think this is one of the issues that, as well as important, is important because, okay, one of my arguments used to be if you want to make medicinal marijuana available to people, okay, go through the process, go through the FDA, and encapsulate it. Nobody. If I went to the doctor and said, I've got an issue, I've got a cold, he's not going to give me an antibiotic to take home to roll in paper and smoke.
Yes.
Like that's
Yeah.
ridiculous. So put cannabis, if it does have this healing property, in through the FDA process and encapsulate it.
Yeah.
Well, okay, they haven't done that. They're not going to do that. They don't need to do that because there's so much pro cannabis thinking in our country right now. But there's a danger in that as well, because now they've circumvented kind of avoid the carcinogens and avoid the tobacco dangers, from cigarettes, by going into edible form.
Yep.
So now we have, edible forms of marijuana that's available that has incredibly high THC content. But there's an added danger in that with the link to psychotic episodes, and that's all in that book by Alex Berenson on Tell Your Children, because the edibles are absorbed into your bloodstream faster than the smokable content of marijuana. So people who have these crazy reactions to marijuana, reefer madness is a myth, is actually a myth.
Right.
There is a percentage of the people, it's a small percentage, but who wants to take that risk, especially with their children? That people can have a psychotic episode. It's actually increased by the use of edibles, and these edibles are being specifically marketed to young people. So at least be informed about these things and what's going on and how the industry itself is sidestepping some of the issues in order to make it more palatable and more acceptable to the American public.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about you brought up a couple scriptures in it, and I think 1 Corinthians 10:23 talking about everything's permissible, but not everything is beneficial.
So let's put all of what we said already into that bucket. Okay, so even if you say everything's permissible, Pastor Tony, which people use that verse to mean crazy kinds of things. But okay, let's say I give you that. Well, I just gave you all this data here. Why is it Is it helpful according to that verse? I don't think so. But let's dig a little deeper, because I think there is a biblical case that we can make against marijuana, even outside of all of that.
Yeah. So I think that's exactly where I was going. Is your points point out that we're called to not be intoxicated,
right,
and to be sober-minded.
Yep.
And you include, and you do say that that's kind of pulled from an analogy somewhat, but you would include marijuana in that.
Yep.
Can you elaborate?
So marijuana usage wasn't common in Paul's day.
Yeah.
When Paul wrote his statements about drunkenness, we looked at Proverbs recently where Solomon basically mocks those people who get drunk on wine and how you lose your faculties and your inhibitions just go crazy. Anyways, okay. So he says wine, and almost all those references, it's wine, strong drink, I think, is another possibility there in Proverbs. Beer is another way to translate that word. So there's no reference to hard liquor.
Yeah.
There's no reference to Jack Daniels or Jose Cuervo or pick your substance. And so, I guess if you want to read it ultra literally, you could say, well, I don't get drunk on wine or even beer. I get drunk on, hard liquor. Yeah. So this passage doesn't apply to me. I try that with Paul. Paul was in the room. Just see what he would think about that. Get him up to speed on the way in which strong drink and other types of drugs have moved in the last 2,000 years. I doubt that Paul would say, you're right. Boy, you really figured out a loophole with what I told you to do. And that's kind of the mentality that some people have with the intoxicant. I will use that term for marijuana. Okay, it doesn't allow for a sober mindedness that we are commanded to have. Yeah, it just take that biblically and deal with it. But also the idea of drunkenness or intoxication, I think a pretty strong case can be made that the kinds of things that Paul is arguing there, and that the New Testament argues and the Old Testament argument, the same effects, even more so, are possible with marijuana. There's certainly, the issue of cocaine. There's still the issue of other hard drugs that, weren't even in circulation or maybe marginally, 2,000 years ago. So I just think it's a bad argument to say the Bible doesn't say anything about marijuana, so we're going to smoke it.
So one of the arguments I do hear a lot, and I would venture to guess you've probably heard it at some point, is as a Christian, they think that, well, you should be more in favor of marijuana than alcohol because marijuana is a plant. God created this plant. Alcohol, we have to do something man-made to make alcohol a thing. Have you heard that? What would you...
Yeah, the seed-bearing plant argument, I actually hear this argument a lot. God made all things good. Good. Genesis 1, Genesis 2. How could anything that God made good be bad?
Yeah.
The problem is that Genesis 3 is a massive game changer. Just read the Bible.
Yeah.
Because Genesis 3 changes everything. And, do people use the same argument for cyanide? That's one of my arguments. Cyanide's a natural thing. Wild mushrooms, 3% of them, as I understand it, are actually toxic and can kill you. God made these mushroom kids. Go on a field day. Let's go out into the woods and just eat whatever shows up in front of us. That's ridiculous. So the idea that it's a seed-bearing plant, marijuana, and so there's no risk. And then also, I think the argument is flawed as well because, it is being altered in the same way that beer and hard liquor is being altered. I mean, you're extracting certain properties from it. You're taking out the impurities. You're trying to maximize the THC content in order to get you high. So I'm sorry, but that argument just doesn't work.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that it does either. And especially with what you just pointed out, I think the THC content now and that people you hear primarily now, and I think it's a justification that they're taking it for some form of medical purpose or that. But if there's that much THC, like there's other options. You had mentioned there's legal, probably isn't the right word, like CBD, things like that, hemp. Let's dig into those a little bit. What do you put those in the same category?
Yeah, they used to use marijuana. So that's the point, is that yes, God made all things good. He created all things, but in the fallen world, they can be perverted and used for evil. So, God made lions too. Should we have pet lions in our homes just walking around in front of our children? I don't think so. Because things changed after Genesis 3. So I ask that question again, because I was going to go somewhere and I totally lost my train of thought.
Basically talking about the fact that there's different variations other than just marijuana.
Yeah. So grapes. Okay. Can we eat grapes? Yes. Can we use it to make grape juice?
Interesting. Okay.
Go for it. Can we use it to make wine? Yes, I think so. But can we use it to get drunk on wine? Does that mean that's okay? No.
Yeah.
God made something good, but it can be perverted. Sex can be perverted and used for evil, even though it's a good thing that God gave us to be used for his glory. So, yes, marijuana, the plant had a function. It was used at one time in the world's history as a product for rope, for hemp.
Yeah.
Better substances have been found since then, and so it's not very useful for that. CBD, as far as I understand it, one of the extracts of the marijuana plant, there's no negative effects of using it, and so have at it.
Yeah.
But to kind of use that, the maybe inane usage of it in those ways to say, okay, now let's also, because of that, we can extract the THC and use it to get high, because God made something good, and everything that comes out of it from good, that doesn't work. Same with grapes, same with the pet lion, same with sex used outside of marriage. We've got to use it in the way that God ordains it in terms of its proper usage.
Yeah, and I do think there might be some sensationalization and some placebo effect going on. This is a personal opinion, personal stance, but going through physical therapy from my multiple surgeries and having injured my back, with massage therapists and the therapies, they use CBD oil and like, hey, this has extra properties that's anti-inflammatory. I'm like, I don't feel any difference whatsoever. Like, I feel better if I go take 100 milligram ibuprofen than this. So in my mind, I'm like, there's not really much there. I don't see the benefit other than if you're chasing the high. That's just my personal take on it. So I have heard a lot my whole life, the argument, which we've touched on, but I'd like to circle back to that it's not addictive.
Yeah.
You take a stance and you say that there's stuff that shows that no, there's addictive property in it.
Yeah, especially psychologically.
Okay.
And then especially with young people with developing brains who get addicted to not just the high that's produced, which is getting more and more intensified as they change the product, but also to the culture, to the I guess the subculture, spending time with friends, and kind of the pothead ethos that sometimes circulate. I mean, that is psychologically addictive. And, I would encourage people, I know we're kind of getting at the end of this podcast, so let me encourage y'all to read 2 books on this if you're really interested in, chasing this down further. The one book is Tell Your Children by Alex Berenson, so really helpful, a lot of data. Something that's a little more accessible is a book called Smokescreen that came out just a few years ago. And he traces, I mean, some of the evidence is anecdotal, but some of the evidence is not. It's more data-driven at the beginning. But he does talk about anecdotally the way that people get hooked and the way culturally and psychologically and even physiologically they get hooked on the high. And one of the problems that emerged, as he shows in that book, is the vaping world, which now you can vape THC and, it's smokeless, odorless. You can't even tell sometimes when kids are vaping THC and they're getting high and going from class to class. And he actually shows evidence of people who have done that, gotten themselves really sick, and their parents had no idea what was happening. And he also shows some pretty convincing evidence as well that the whole vaping crisis that took place just a few years ago, where people were dying, the big cannabis lobbies have actually tamped down the reality that up to 80% of that involved THC vaping. Nobody talks about that.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
And so we have vapors who have actually died and gotten hooked on these substances, and a lot of it is related. And you don't hear about it. They don't talk about that. They just talk about vaping as this harm that's been caused upon our world. Well, what's the drive for vaping besides maybe nicotine or tobacco or getting out of? I mean, there's this drive right now to vape THC. So,
and we touched on it a little bit, and we kind of went to, okay, there's now edible versions of it, but my big stance always was, okay, yeah, there's marijuana, even if it is healthy and there's health benefit, you're bringing smoke into your lungs, and no form or shape of any type is that good for your body. So that was always my big stance. Beyond that, I didn't have a big one. I reconsidered a lot of that.
Similarly, as Christians, we've always been able to say, marijuana is illegal.
Yeah,
so
true.
End of story.
Yeah.
We don't need to wrestle with it further.
Now
but
we have to.
We have to now.
Yeah.
Because it's barreling towards legalization, and I think a third of the states now it's legal. It's legal in Illinois, where I used to live. I was there. I saw it happen. Not in Texas. Federally, it's not, but we're moving that direction. So we need a better argument as Christians than, well, the government says we shouldn't do it, so don't do it.
And you make a point, and it's a point I've heard a lot used against tattoos, which is a whole different conversation we don't need to dig into.
That's
but
another podcast.
It could be. But you make the point that the body is temple for the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Can you kind of give us a synopsis of that real quick? Thoughts there?
Yeah, I just think the body should be stewarded, and Paul's talking about sexual misconduct there and the dangers associated with that. I do think STDs were a reality in that first century world. The science behind it isn't what it is now, where we know those things. But yes, this is the place where the Holy Spirit dwells, us as Christians, and so to fill this dwelling place full of an intoxicant, marijuana smoke, that takes us to an altered state of consciousness, that doesn't in any way, despite what some people might say, draw us closer to the Lord. I mean, I think tangentially that's an argument as well to add to the other arguments that we talked about already about sober-mindedness. So
yeah, and I would even, you touched on a point, and again, this is kind of a different topic and maybe a little bit of a soapbox or hobby horse that I have. Like, people talk about that, getting that high and having visions and seeing angels and things like that. Arguably, my argument and my stance firmly there is that ain't an angel you're seeing. You're talking to a demon. You probably want to draw a hard line there.
Yeah. And people seeking revelations from God. I mean, we had that problem in the church all the time.
Yeah.
Like, read your Bible.
Exactly.
You don't need revelations from an altered state of consciousness.
You've got the
How
Word
can
of God.
you trust that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, man, now you're
They
getting
deceive.
amped up again.
Yeah, we can go into that one in a different theology in action there. So as we wrap up, any final thoughts, takeaways?
Yeah, so this is more like a fast talking back and forth for a more, I guess, structured way in which I'm presenting this material. Go ahead and watch that lecture online, Walk the Talk, Christians and Marijuana, and I'll outline there the 6 myths about marijuana that get circulated in our day, and then also 4 biblical reasons why I think Christians should avoid it.
All right, very good. Thank you. This has been a good topic, a lot to think about. It's actually challenged some of my stances prior. If you at home are interested in more of our content or interested in the Walk the Talk we were talking about, you can go to vbbf.org. We live stream all of our Wednesdays and Sundays teachings there. I will have that Walk the Talk link to this video here at the end. You can also check out other theology in actions here for you. Till next time.